What happens when a man on top of the world, the self-made CEO of a tech empire, decides his pregnant wife is no longer enough? Andrew Vance thought he was trading up, leaving his loving, devoted wife, Emma, for a younger, more exciting model. He thought he was untouchable, that his company, his kingdom was secure. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot who Emma's father was. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about a quiet, unassuming billionaire who watched his daughter's heart break and decided that revenge wasn't enough. He wanted annihilation. This is the story of how a titan of industry bought his son-in-law's entire company, not out of spite, but as a simple, devastating business transaction. The house on Bellevue Avenue was a monument to modern success, a sprawling glass and steel structure with panoramic views of the Seattle skyline. It was the physical manifestation of Andrew Vance's ambition. At 34, he was the charismatic founder and CEO of Innovatech Solutions, a data analytics firm that had in 6 short years become the darling of the tech world. He had the jawline of a movie star, the confidence of a Roman emperor, and a wardrobe of bespoke suits that cost more than most people's cars. And he had Emma. Emma Beaumont Vance was the quiet, elegant heart of their home. To the outside world, she was the perfect CEO's wife, graceful, intelligent, and impeccably dressed. She hosted charity galas with an effortless charm that made old money and new tech money mingle without friction. But her true world was smaller, more intimate. It was the scent of the lavender she grew in their rooftop garden, the feel of the first tiny kick from the baby growing inside her, and the lingering hope that the man she loved would come home before midnight. Tonight, like most nights, he was late. Emma sat in the nursery. They had just finished painting a soft, calming shade of sage green. The custom-built crib from a Scandinavian designer stood empty, a silent promise of the life that was about to begin. She was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of it was a constant comforting presence. She ran a hand over her swollen belly, humming a nameless tune. Her phone buzzed on the rocking chair beside her. It was a text from Andrew. "Closing the big one. Don't wait up. E." The big one was the Serafina contract, a multi-million-dollar deal that would cement Innovatech's position as an industry leader. She should have been thrilled. Instead, a familiar chill as cold and sterile as their minimalist living room settled over her. The big one had been the excuse for the past 3 weeks. Late nights, cancelled dinners, weekend trips to meet with investors. Emma knew Andrew was driven. It was one of the things she'd fallen in love with. When they met, he was just a brilliant coder with a dream working out of a cramped garage. She was an art history graduate volunteering at a local museum. She never told him about her father for the first 6 months. She wanted to be sure he saw her not the heiress to the Beaumont Holdings empire. Her father, Alistair Beaumont, was a man who moved markets with a single phone call, a corporate titan who owned everything from shipping lines to pharmaceutical labs. He was an old-world power, a force of nature, hidden behind a quiet, reserved demeanor. When Andrew found out, he was stunned, but it only seemed to fuel his ambition. He was determined to make it on his own, to build something that could stand, however humbly, next to the Beaumont legacy. Emma had admired that. She had believed in him using her own trust fund to provide the seed money. He needed a fact they kept between themselves. Now his ambition felt different. It felt hollow. It no longer seemed to be about building a future for them, but about building a monument to himself. She stood up, her back aching, and walked to their master bedroom. The king-sized bed felt vast and empty. She picked up the tablet on Andrew's nightstand to check the weather for the next day, a simple domestic act. But the screen was already on, left open to his personal email. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She never looked. It felt like a violation. But a single line from an open email caught her eye. The sender was Isabella Rossi Innovatek's fiercely ambitious and stunningly beautiful head of marketing. The subject line was tonight. The message was short, but it detonated a bomb in the quiet stillness of Emma's world. Can't wait to have you all to myself again. This hotel is divine. Forget the deal. You're the only thing I want to close tonight. All my love, I. Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, the cold dread spreading through her veins. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual intimacy, the suggestion of countless other nights just like this one. The late nights, the business trips, the detached way he'd touched her lately. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. She scrolled up her hands, trembling. There were dozens of them. Emails stretching back months, pet names, inside jokes, explicit descriptions of their liaisons. They painted a picture of a passionate, all-consuming affair. In one, Andrew had written, "Emma is wonderful, of course, but she's from another world, a beautiful, safe museum. You're the real world. You're alive. A beautiful, safe museum." That's what he thought of her, the mother of his child. The sound of the front door unlocking downstairs made her gasp. She dropped the tablet back on the nightstand as if it were burning hot. She heard his footsteps on the floating staircase, confident and brisk. He was home early. Andrew appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey. We did it. We landed in Serafina." Emma looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in months. She saw the handsome face, the expensive suit, the confident posture. But underneath it, she saw a stranger. A man who could build an empire of data and code, but whose heart was a bankrupt enterprise. "That's wonderful, Andrew," she said, her voice a hollow echo of its former self. He didn't notice. He was too absorbed in his own victory. "This changes everything. We're in the big leagues now." He walked over and placed a perfunctory kiss on her forehead, his hand briefly touching her stomach. "How are you? And the little guy doing?" Emma didn't flinch, but it took every ounce of her self-control. "We're fine," she said, the words tasting like ash. "We're just waiting for you to come home." The lie hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. He had come home, but he had left his heart, his soul in a divine hotel room with a woman named Isabella. And in that moment, Emma knew her gilded cage had just become a prison. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in denial and performance. Emma moved through her life like a ghost, haunting the set of a perfect marriage. She smiled at the right times, asked about Andrew's day, and discussed baby names, all while the words from those emails played on a torturous loop in her mind. A beautiful, safe museum. Andrew buoyed by the Serafina deal, and his secret life was oblivious. He mistook her quietness for serene pregnancy, her distance for fatigue. He was more charming than ever, a man playing the part of a loving husband, because it was the last role he had to perfect before exiting stage left. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Emma was in the kitchen arranging flowers when Andrew strode in, already dressed, a packed carry-on bag in his hand. "Morning," he said, grabbing a protein bar from the pantry. "I have to fly out to Singapore. A last-minute investor summit. It's a huge opportunity." Emma stared at the bag. It was a sleek black leather holdall she had given him for their 3rd anniversary. Singapore. When did this come up? Last night. It's all very sudden. Wheels up in 3 hours, he said, avoiding her eyes. He was a terrible liar when he wasn't prepared. His tells were subtle, a slight tightening of the jaw, a tendency to check his watch, even when he wasn't wearing one. That's a long flight for a short trip, she said, her voice dangerously calm. When will you be back Friday? Saturday at the latest, he said, his tone dismissive, as if she were questioning his work ethic. A cold certainty settled in Emma's stomach. She put down the shears she was holding. Let me see your phone, Andrew. He froze the protein bar halfway to his mouth. Why I just want to see the flight confirmation, for my own peace of mind. His face hardened. The charming CEO evaporated, replaced by a cornered animal. Don't be ridiculous, Emma. I don't have time for this. I have a plane to catch. You have a plane to catch, or she has a plane to catch. The question landed in the silent kitchen with the force of a physical blow. The color drained from Andrew's face. He knew. He knew that she knew. The charade was over. What are you talking about? He stammered, but the denial was weak, pathetic. Isabella Rossi. Emma said the name, feeling foreign and venomous on her tongue. Is she a good travel companion? Does she also enjoy the divine hotels you book for your investor summits? Andrew dropped his bag. The soft thud echoed in the cavernous room. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his composure finally shattering. For a moment he looked lost, like the young man she had first met, the one who was terrified of failure. But it was fleeting. The arrogance returned colder and sharper than before. All right, he said, his voice low. All right. I didn't want you to find out this way. This way. Emma let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. How did you want me to find out, Andrew? A memo? An email? Or were you just going to wait until our son was born and then tell me you'd found someone more alive? He flinched at her use of his own words. It's not like that. It's complicated. No, it's not. She shot back, her voice rising with a grief so profound it felt like it would tear her in two. It's the oldest, simplest, most pathetic story in the world. You got successful, and you decided your pregnant wife was weighing you down. You traded us in for something new and shiny. Emma. That's not fair, he protested. We've been growing apart for years. You're happy in this bubble. This quiet, perfect life. I want more, Isabella. She gets it. She gets the drive, the hunger. The hunger for what? Andrew Moore. Money. More fame. Or just the hunger for a woman who isn't carrying your child. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a fury she didn't know she possessed. I believed in you. I funded your dream when no one else would. I stood by you, and this is how you repay me. You humiliate me while I am carrying our son. The word funded hit its mark. His eyes narrowed. Don't you dare throw that in my face. I built Innovatech. I made it what it is. No one is disputing that, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you didn't do it alone, and you seem to have forgotten that. He sighed, a long, weary sound of a man who had already made his decision. Look, this isn't working. It hasn't been for a long time. I'm in love with Isabella. I'm leaving. Just like that. The finality of it was absolute. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a moment of weakness. It was a statement of fact. You're leaving, Emma repeated, numb. I've already leased an apartment. My things will be moved out by the end of the week," he said, his voice now cold and clinical, as if he were discussing a business merger. "We'll have our lawyers handle the rest. I'll be fair. I'll provide for the child, of course." He was divorcing her. He was carving up their life into assets and liabilities. The baby, their baby, was just another line item in the settlement. He picked up his bag and walked towards the door, stopping for a moment with his back to her. "It's for the best, Emma. For both of us." He didn't look back. He just walked out. The heavy front door clicked shut, the sound sealing the end of her world. Emma stood alone in the sun-drenched kitchen, surrounded by the beautiful empty trappings of her life. The flowers, the marble countertops, the view of the city. It was all just a set for a play whose leading man had just walked off stage. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. For a long time she didn't move. Then, with a shaking hand, she reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts past friends and doctors until she found the one name she knew she could always count on. The one man Andrew Vance had fatally underestimated. She pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Emma, is everything all right, sweetheart?" A calm, deep voice answered. She took a ragged breath, the sobs she had been holding back finally breaking free. "Dad?" she cried. "Dad, Andrew's gone. He left me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. When Alistair Beaumont finally spoke, his voice was deceptively gentle, but underneath it, Emma could hear the sound of an epper sharpening its steel. "I'm on my way." Alistair Beaumont's office occupied the entire top floor of the Beaumont Tower, a sleek obsidian monolith that pierced the Seattle sky. From his desk, he had a god's-eye view of the city, the Puget Sound, and the distant snow-capped peaks of the Olympic Mountains. The room was a study in controlled power, dark mahogany, brushed steel, and a single priceless Rothko on the wall that radiated a deep, brooding energy. There were no family photos, no clutter, just a phone, a monitor displaying global market data, and the man himself. At 65, Alistair had the kind of stillness that made other men nervous. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. His power wasn't in what he said, but in what he didn't have to say. When he entered a room, valuations shifted and careers were made or broken. He had built his empire with a combination of brilliant foresight, relentless discipline, and a capacity for strategic ruthlessness that was legendary in the corporate world. But all of that was just business. Emma was his heart. He had ended the call with his daughter, his hand still resting on the receiver. He had listened to her broken sobs, and with each one a cold tectonic fury had begun to build deep within him. He had never liked Andrew Vance. He'd seen the raw, naked ambition in the young man's eyes from the beginning. He saw a man who didn't love his daughter, but loved what she represented, a shortcut to a world he was desperate to conquer. But Emma had loved him, and for Alistair, his daughter's happiness was the only variable that mattered. He had stood aside, offered quiet support, and hoped he was wrong. He had not been wrong. He swiveled his leather chair to face the window, looking down at the city sprawling below. Andrew Vance's company, Innovatech Solutions, was down there somewhere. A bright, shiny new building in the South Lake Union Tech Hub. A company built in part with his daughter's money and her unwavering belief. A company that had given her husband the power and platform to betray her in the most cruel and public way possible. Andrew thought he was a player. He thought his little tech firm made him a king. Alistair was about to show him what a real kingdom looked like. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Eleanor, get me Jake Thorne. Now." Jake Thorne was the head of mergers and acquisitions for Beaumont Holdings, a man Alistair affectionately referred to as his corporate predator. Thorne was a shark who swam in the deepest, most dangerous waters of international finance, and he was fiercely loyal to the man who paid him a fortune to be one. Less than 30 seconds later, his line chimed. "Jake here, Mr. Beaumont." Jake Alistair's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I have a new project for you. I want a complete top-to-bottom analysis of a company called Innovatech Solutions. Founder Andrew Vance." There was a brief pause. "The data analytics firm. They just landed the Serafina contract. Their valuation is soaring." "I'm aware," Alistair said. "I want everything. Shareholder breakdown debt structure. Key personnel vulnerabilities. I want to know where every dollar flows. I want to know the names of the janitors who clean their offices. I want it all delivered to my private residence by 6 a.m. tomorrow." "Understood, sir. May I ask the objective? Are we looking for a strategic partnership? An investment?" Alistair watched a ferry glide across the grey waters of the Sound. "The objective, Jake," he said slowly, letting the weight of each word sink in, "is ownership." Another pause, this one longer. Jake Thorne was not a man easily surprised, but this was unexpected. Beaumont Holdings didn't invest in overvalued tech startups. They bought foundational industries, shipping manufacturing resources. "A hostile takeover?" Jake finally asked, his voice laced with professional excitement. "No," Alistair corrected him. "Nothing so dramatic. This will be quiet, clinical. I don't want Andrew Vance to know what's happening until my name is on the deed to his front door. We will acquire his company through proxies, shell corporations, and any other means necessary. We will leverage his debt. We will court his minority shareholders. We will move like a ghost. When we are done, he will be the CEO of a company that reports directly to me." "That's ambitious, sir. Their stock is at an all-time high. Vance holds a controlling interest. Everyone has a vulnerability, Jake." "Find him." Alistair's gaze drifted to the Rothko on his wall. It was all shades of crimson and black, a storm of colour trapped on a canvas. "And Jake spare no expense. This is not a line item on the corporate budget. This is a personal matter." "Understood, Mr. Beaumont." Alistair hung up. He then made 2 more calls. The first was to the most feared divorce attorney in the state, instructing them to protect his daughter's interests with extreme prejudice. The second was to his personal security team to arrange for discreet surveillance on Isabella Rossi, not to harm her, but to understand her. Every predator studies its prey. His work done for the moment, he stood and walked to a small hidden bar behind a panel of mahogany. He poured a small measure of Macallan 25 into a crystal glass. He didn't drink it. He just held it, the amber liquid catching the fading light. He had spent his life building an empire to protect his family, to give his daughter a world of safety and privilege. And a little man with a cheap suit and a big ego had walked into that world and tried to burn it down. Andrew Vance thought he had started a war with Emma. He was mistaken. He had started a war with Alistair Beaumont, and it was a war he could not possibly win. While Alistair Beaumont's machine whirred into silent, deadly motion, Andrew Vance was living in a state of euphoric liberation. The initial messy confrontation with Emma was a distant memory, a necessary unpleasantness on the path to his new upgraded life. He and Isabella had moved into a stunning penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Union, a palace of glass and chrome that screamed new money. Isabella Rossi was everything Andrew thought he wanted. She was sharp, ambitious, and utterly intoxicating. Their conversations weren't about nursery colors or obstetrician appointments. They were about Series C funding rounds, market disruption, and their shared glorious future. She looked at him with an undisguised adoration that fed his ego like gasoline on a fire. She wasn't just his lover. She was his biggest cheerleader. "You're a legend, Andrew," she'd murmur, tracing the lines of his chest as they lay in bed, the city lights twinkling below. Leaving her, that took courage. You chose passion. You chose life. He believed her. He had reframed the narrative in his mind. He wasn't a man who had abandoned his pregnant wife. He was a visionary who had freed himself from the constraints of a conventional life that was holding him back. Emma, with her quiet elegance and old money sensibilities, had been an anchor. Isabella was a rocket. Innovatech Solutions was thriving. The Serafina deal had opened doors he'd only dreamed of. His face was on the cover of Tech Disruptors magazine, under the headline, "The Man Who Sees the Future." He was high on his own success, insulated from reality by a wall of sycophants and yes-men. The divorce proceedings began, and Andrew approached them with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to business. His lawyer, a slick corporate shark named Julian Croft, advised a swift, aggressive approach. "We make a generous but firm initial offer," Julian explained in his polished office. "Enough to make her look unreasonable if she refuses. We control the narrative. The brilliant, self-made man, providing for his ex-wife, who comes from a family of unimaginable wealth." Andrew agreed. He offered Emma the Bellevue house, which was technically in her name anyway, and a monthly child support payment that was by any normal standard astronomical. But it was a pittance compared to the true value of his stock in Innovatech, which he argued was a premarital asset he had built himself. He conveniently forgot the seed money Emma had provided. Emma, on the advice of her father's legal team, refused the offer without comment. "She's playing hardball." Andrew scoffed to Isabella over a $500 bottle of wine at a trendy restaurant. Her father is probably whispering in her ear, trying to squeeze me. "Let him try," Isabella said, touching his hand. "They can't touch you. You're fireproof." He felt fireproof. But strange things were beginning to happen on the periphery of his vision. A major institutional investor, one who had been with him from the early days, abruptly sold its entire 8% stake in Innovatech. The shares were bought up within minutes on the open market, but the buyer was a newly formed opaque holding company based in Delaware called North Star Acquisitions. It was unusual, but not alarming. Then 2 weeks later, a consortium of smaller venture capital firms who held another 12% collectively sold their shares. Again, they were snapped up instantly this time by a different entity, Apex Consolidated Ventures, registered in the Cayman Islands. Andrew's CFO, a nervous man named David Chen, brought it to his attention. "It's odd, Andrew," David said, pointing to a chart in the boardroom. "In less than a month, 20% of our company has been consolidated by 2 anonymous buyers. We don't know who they are or what their intention is." Andrew leaned back in his chair, feeling a flicker of annoyance. "It's a vote of confidence, David. Someone with deep pockets sees our potential and is buying in before our next quarterly earnings, Send the stock into orbit. It's good news, but we don't know who someone is, David pressed. It could be a competitor looking to gain a foothold to get a seat on the board. No one is getting a seat on my board, Andrew said, with finality, his ego leaving no room for doubt. I still hold 51% of the voting shares. I am Innovatech, end of story. He dismissed David's concerns as overly cautious accounting department paranoia. He was too busy. He and Isabella were the city's new power couple, seen at every high-profile event. They were planning a trip to Monaco on a private jet. He was in the process of commissioning a custom sports car. He was living the life he'd read about in magazines, and he had no time for phantom threats. The ultimate symbol of his obliviousness came during a deposition for the divorce. Emma's lawyer, a formidable older woman named Harriet Mayhew, was questioning him about his assets. Mr. Vance, Harriet, said, her tone mild. Could you confirm the current ownership structure of Innovatech Solutions? Andrew smirked. Of course. I am the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder, and you hold 51% of the stock, is that correct? That is correct. So the remaining 49% is held by various institutional and private investors. Correct. Harriet Mayhew paused, looking down at a folder in front of her. And are you aware of any significant recent changes to the ownership of that 49%? Andrew felt a prickle of irritation. This was a fishing expedition. There's been some market activity. Healthy consolidation. It's of no concern. Harriet looked up, her eyes locking onto his. So you are unconcerned that a single unidentified block of buyers now controls 46% of your company, and that they have also in the past week bought up a significant portion of your corporate debt from 3 different financial institutions. The air left Andrew's lungs. 46%. Debt. It wasn't possible. David had said 20%. Where did she get this information? That's an unsubstantiated claim. He stammered, looking at his own lawyer, who looked equally blindsided. Harriet Mayhew simply smiled, a thin, predatory smile. Is it Mr. Vance? We shall see. He left the deposition feeling shaken for the first time. He called David Chen, his voice sharp with anger. What the hell is going on? David, why am I hearing about this from my wife's lawyer? David's voice was panicked. Andrew, I've been trying to tell you, the trading has been happening in dark pools, off-market transfers. It's sophisticated. It's aggressive. It's like a corporate python, slowly wrapping itself around us. We have no idea who it is, but they're getting dangerously close to a controlling interest if they can sway even one other board member. The fool's paradise was beginning to crumble. The solid ground beneath Andrew's feet was turning to sand. For the first time, he felt a genuine flicker of fear. Someone was hunting him, and he had no idea who was holding the gun. The storm broke on a Thursday. Andrew was in a board meeting presenting a rosy projection for the next fiscal year. He was trying to project an aura of calm, unshakable confidence, but the knowledge that a 46% stake in his company was held by a ghost gnawed at him. His board members, once deferential, were now asking pointed questions. They could smell the blood in the water. In the middle of his presentation, his CFO, David Chen, burst into the room, his face ashen. He didn't even knock. Andrew, you need to see this. He thrust a tablet into Andrew's hands. It was open to a press release that had just hit the wire services for immediate release. Beaumont Holdings announces acquisition of controlling interest in Innovatech Solutions. Andrew read the headline 3 times, but the words wouldn't make sense. It felt like a typo, a prank. Beaumont Holdings, Alistair's company. They were in shipping, pharmaceuticals, and heavy industry. They didn't touch tech. He scanned the text, his heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against his ribs. Through its wholly owned subsidiaries, North Star Acquisitions and Apex Consolidated Ventures, Beaumont Holdings has successfully acquired 49% of the outstanding shares of Innovatech Solutions. Furthermore, Beaumont Holdings has assumed a majority position in Innovatech's corporate debt portfolio, effectively giving it strategic control of the company's financial future. A formal offer will be presented to the remaining shareholders to acquire all outstanding stock at a premium of 15% above yesterday's closing price. Mr. Alistair Beaumont has been appointed chairman of the board, effective immediately. The room fell silent. The board members stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. North Star Acquisitions, Apex Consolidated Ventures. They weren't just anonymous buyers. They were Alistair. It had been Alistair all along. This wasn't a hostile takeover. That would have been noisy public. This was an assassination. A quiet, clinical, perfectly executed corporate maneuver that had been happening in the shadows for months while he was playing the role of the tech mogul. He had been so obsessed with his own reflection that he had failed to see the Titan standing right behind him. His phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. It was his broker, his lawyer, and news outlets. The world was finding out. He felt a wave of nausea. He stumbled out of the boardroom, ignoring the stunned questions from his colleagues, and made his way to his office. His corner office with its panoramic views of the city. His city. His company. He sank into his chair, the press release still glowing on the tablet. It was a declaration of war. No, it was a declaration of victory. The war was already over. He had just been the last to know. Isabella chose that moment to walk in a bright smile on her face. "Darling, I was thinking about that gallery opening tonight." She stopped when she saw his face. "Andrew." "What is it?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." He just pushed the tablet across the desk towards her. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read. He watched her face as the information processed. The initial confusion, the flicker of disbelief, and then the slow, cold dawning of understanding. The adoration she usually looked at him with was replaced by something else calculation. She was re-evaluating her investment. "Beaumont," she whispered. "Emma's father." Yes, Andrew croaked, his voice raw. Emma's father. But how? Why? Andrew let out a harsh, broken laugh. "Because I left his daughter. Because I was a fool. I thought I was divorcing Emma. I didn't realize I was taking on Alistair Beaumont. He had underestimated his enemy. It was the cardinal sin of both war and business. He had seen Alistair as a relic, an old man from a bygone era of industry. He had never imagined that the old man's reach could extend so silently and so completely into his own world. Alistair hadn't just bought some stock. He'd bought Andrew's debt. He owned him. He owned the bank that held the lease on his fancy apartment. He owned the financiers who backed his next project. He owned his future. The intercom on his desk buzzed. It was his assistant. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Vance, there's a Mr. Beaumont here to see you." Andrew felt a jolt of pure, cold terror. He was here. The ghost was no longer in the machine. He was standing at the gates. "Send him in," Andrew said, his voice barely a whisper. The door opened, and Alistair Beaumont walked into the office. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored grey suit. He looked calm, almost serene. He took in the office, his gaze lingering for a moment on the ostentatious modern art Andrew had spent a fortune on. His eyes the same shade of deep blue as Emma's finally settled on Andrew. They held no anger, no malice. Just the quiet, terrifying indifference of a man looking at a column of numbers on a spreadsheet. Vance Alistair said, his voice as quiet as the hum of the air conditioning. "I believe you've been introduced to your new chairman." The silence in the office was absolute. Isabella seemed to shrink, making herself small in the presence of this new immense gravity that had just entered the room. Andrew stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He was a king in this castle, but the man who had just walked in owned the ground it was built on. Alistair Andrew began trying to inject a strength into his voice that he didn't feel. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke? A scare tactic for the divorce?" Alistair Beaumont allowed a small, humorless smile to touch his lips. He walked past Andrew and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city below. "There is no joke, Andrew," he said, his back still to him. "This is business. My business now. I looked at your company, and I saw an asset that was mismanaged, over-leveraged, run by a CEO whose attention was divided. So I corrected the market." "You corrected the market." Andrew's voice rose, bordering on hysterical. "You destroyed me. You did this to get back at me, for Emma." Alistair turned around, slowly, his expression unreadable. "You flatter yourself. Revenge is an emotional, messy pursuit. I don't engage in it. This was a simple value proposition. You took the most valuable asset in my life, my daughter's happiness, and you treated it with contempt. You broke it. In my world, when someone damages a valuable asset, they are made to pay for it. It's as simple as that." He gestured around the opulent office. "You built all of this to feel powerful. But power isn't a corner office or a magazine cover, son. Power is the ability to make a single phone call and rearrange a man's entire reality. You are a tenant in a world where I am the landlord." Every word was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the last vestiges of Andrew's ego. He looked desperately towards Isabella, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But she was looking at Alistair Beaumont with a rapt attention, the kind of look she used to give Andrew. She was watching real power, and she was captivated by it. At that moment, Andrew knew he had lost her too. "So what now?" Andrew asked, his voice cracking. "You fire me. You dismantle everything I've built." "Fire you?" Alistair almost seemed amused. "No. That would be too easy. A severance package, a non-disclosure agreement, and you'd be free to go start again. No, you're not going anywhere. As of this morning, my board, has voted to restructure your role. You are no longer CEO." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You've been reassigned. You are now the Vice President of Legacy Systems Integration. You'll be reporting to the new CEO who starts on Monday. Your office will be on the 4th floor. I'm told it has a lovely view of the parking garage." The humiliation was so profound, so absolute, that Andrew couldn't even speak. He was to be a middle manager in the company he had created, a ghost haunting the hallways of his own kingdom, forced to watch as another person sat in his chair, lived his life. It was a fate worse than being fired. It was a corporate death sentence. "You're a monster," Andrew whispered. I am a father, Alistair corrected him, his voice suddenly hard as granite. You put my pregnant daughter through hell. You made her feel worthless. You did that in a world where I exist. Did you really think there would be no consequences? Alistair then turned his attention to Isabella for the first time. He didn't glower or threaten. He simply looked at her. Miss Rossi, he said, his tone polite. Your position as head of marketing has been made redundant. Your access cards will cease to function in 1 hour. Security will escort you out. Good day. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps silent on the expensive rug. He had said all he needed to say. The moment the door closed, the spell was broken. Isabella looked at Andrew, her face a mask of cold fury and disappointment. You idiot, she hissed. You absolute idiot. You picked a fight with a god, and you didn't even know it. Isabella. We can fight this. Andrew pleaded, reaching for her. She recoiled, as if his touch were poison. There is no we, Andrew. I invested in a winner. You're not a winner. You're a footnote in another man's story. She grabbed her purse from the desk. Don't call me, she said. And then she walked out of his life as easily as Alistair Beaumont had. Andrew Vance was left alone in his magnificent office, which was no longer his. He looked out at the city, but the view was different now. It was no longer a kingdom at his feet. It was a world that had chewed him up and spit him out. A world that belonged to men like Alistair Beaumont. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wings, which he had thought were made of steel, had turned out to be made of wax. He had lost everything. His wife, his child, his mistress, his company, his pride. All of it gone. Not in a fiery explosion, but in the quiet, rustling sound of signed papers and stock certificates changing hands. 6 months later, the autumn rains had returned to Seattle, washing the city clean. In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, far from the gleaming towers of downtown, a different kind of life was beginning. Emma Beaumont. She had dropped Vance from her name the day the divorce was finalized, rocked her newborn daughter in her arms. She had named her Lily Beaumont, a name that represented resilience and a new beginning. She hadn't moved back into her father's grand estate. Instead, she had bought a warm, inviting home with a large garden. It was filled not with minimalist art, but with comfortable furniture shelves, overflowing with books and the sweet, chaotic mess of a new baby. Her life was no longer about charity galas or being the perfect corporate wife. It was about Lily's feeding schedule, the scent of baby powder, and the profound, overwhelming love she felt every time she looked at her daughter's face. The fury and heartbreak of Andrew's betrayal had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was now a quiet strength, a bedrock of self-awareness she had never possessed before. She realized she had spent years living in Andrew's shadow, defining her worth by his success. His departure, as brutal as it had been, had forced her out into the sun. Her father visited often, not as the corporate titan, but as a doting grandfather. He would sit on the floor, making faces at Lily, his rumbling laughter filling the house. He never spoke of what he had done to Andrew. He didn't need to. Emma knew. She had seen the news reports about the dramatic restructuring at Innovatech, now rebranded as Beaumont Data Intelligence. One afternoon as he was leaving, he paused at the door. "Are you happy, Emma?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "I am, Dad," she said, and she meant it. "I'm more than happy. I'm whole." He nodded, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. That's all that ever mattered. Emma found her own purpose, using the generous and entirely one-sided divorce settlement. Her father's lawyers had secured, along with her own inheritance, she started the Lily Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing financial and legal support for single mothers who had been left in vulnerable situations. Her pain had become her passion. She was no longer a resident of a beautiful, safe museum. She was the architect of a sanctuary for others. As for Andrew, his life had become a purgatory of his own making. He worked on the 4th floor of his old building in a beige cubicle. He was a cautionary tale, a ghost who walked the halls. New employees would whisper about him, the founder who had spectacularly imploded. He performed his menial tasks with a numb, robotic efficiency. He drove a modest sedan and lived in a sterile apartment in the suburbs. He saw the press release about the Lily Foundation. He saw a picture of Emma, smiling, holding their daughter. She looked more beautiful and more powerful than he had ever seen her. He saw his daughter, his own flesh and blood, a child who would carry the Beaumont name, not his. A child who would one day inherit a portion of an empire he had foolishly tried to challenge. He was forced every single day to witness the legacy he had built being expertly managed and grown by his replacement, a sharp, competent woman hand-picked by Alistair. He was forced to see the world move on without him, to understand that he had never been the indispensable man he thought he was. He was just a small, arrogant man who had made a very, very big mistake. He had left his pregnant wife for a mistress, and in doing so, he hadn't just lost his family. He had lost himself. His punishment wasn't poverty or prison. It was something far more poetic. It was the quiet, unending irrelevance of being a footnote in the story of the woman he had so carelessly thrown away. 2 years passed. In the world of tech, 2 years is an eternity. Beaumont Data Intelligence. The company formerly known as Innovatech was more successful than ever. Under its new CEO and the ironclad guidance of its chairman, Alistair Beaumont, it had expanded globally, its innovations lauded as revolutionary. The name Andrew Vance, once synonymous with its success, was now a forgotten whisper, a piece of trivia known only to company veterans and industry historians. For Andrew, time had moved differently. It hadn't marched forward. It had frozen. His life was a loop of quiet desperation. He would wake up in his sterile apartment, drive his sensible car to the 4th floor office and perform the tasks assigned to him by people who were once his terrified subordinates. He was competent enough to not get fired, but too broken to ever leave. He was a ghost in his own machine, haunting the life he'd built and lost. The fire in his belly, the ambition that had driven him to scale mountains, had been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ash of regret. On a bright, crisp Saturday in October, driven by a masochistic impulse he didn't fully understand, he visited the Pike Place market. He and Emma used to come here on weekends, in their early, happier years, buying fresh flowers and artisanal cheese. He moved through the bustling crowds like a phantom, invisible and unnoticed. And then he saw her. She was standing near a flower stall, the one that sells enormous bouquets of sunflowers. But it wasn't the Emma he remembered. The perfectly coiffed, elegantly dressed CEO's wife was gone. This woman wore jeans, a comfortable sweater, and her hair was tied back in a simple loose ponytail. She was laughing a genuine, unburdened sound that seemed to make the air around her sparkle. And holding her hand was a little girl, perhaps 2 years old, with a wild mane of dark curly hair and a determined look on her face as she pointed a chubby finger at a bright red balloon. It was Lily, his daughter. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. He had seen pictures, of course, in the society pages covering the Lily Foundation's charity events. But a picture was a flat, two-dimensional thing. This was real. This was his child, a living, breathing person in the world. She had his hair. From this distance, he could see she had Emma's startlingly blue eyes. He watched as Emma knelt down to speak to her, her face filled with a love so pure and powerful it was like a physical force. In that moment, watching them, Andrew felt the full crushing weight of his stupidity. The penthouse, Isabella the magazine covers. It was all a cheap, gaudy mirage compared to this one perfect, simple moment. This was the treasure he had discarded like trash. An unseen force pulled him forward. He didn't know what he would say, what he hoped to achieve. He just had to be closer. Emma. His voice was a rusty croak. She looked up, and her smile didn't vanish, but it froze. It became a polite, impenetrable mask. The warmth in her eyes was instantly replaced by a cool, distant neutrality. "Andrew," she said. Her voice was calm. There was no anger, no pain. There was nothing. It was the voice you would use for a stranger who had asked for directions. Lily, sensing the shift in her mother's demeanor, pressed closer against Emma's leg. Her blue eyes wide and curious as she looked up at the sad-faced man. I just tore you," he stammered, feeling like a fool. "I wanted to say hello." He looked down at his daughter. "And to see her. This is Lily," Emma said simply, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's head. "She's beautiful," Andrew whispered, a raw ache spreading through his chest. He crouched down slightly, trying to smile. "Hi, Lily. I'm Andrew." The little girl just stared, her thumb finding its way into her mouth. She didn't know him. Why would she? To her, he was just another face in the crowd. A stranger. Emma remained standing, a silent, unshakable guardian. Her lack of emotion was more damning than any tirade could have been. He had caused her unimaginable pain, and she had processed it, moved past it, and healed so completely that he no longer had the power to affect her at all. He was irrelevant. "I'm sorry, Emma." He said the words, feeling pitifully inadequate. "For everything. I know it's too late, but I am so sorry." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a pity. "I know you are, Andrew," she said softly. "I hope you find some peace. But we have to go now." She gently took Lily's hand. "Come on, sweet pea. Let's get you that balloon." She didn't look back. She walked away, guiding their daughter through the crowd, and disappeared behind a throng of tourists. Andrew remained crouched on the cobblestones for a long moment, the sounds of the market fading to a dull roar in his ears. The demotion, the loss of his company, the public humiliation he had thought that was his punishment. He was wrong. This was the punishment. Living the rest of his life knowing that he was just a stranger to his own child, knowing that he had willingly traded a lifetime of moments like the one he had just witnessed for an illusion of power and a fleeting affair. He had not only been dethroned, he had been erased, and that was a sentence from which there would be no appeal. The story of Andrew Vance is a stark and powerful reminder that the choices we make have consequences that can ripple out in unimaginable ways. He thought he was just breaking a heart, but he was actually breaking a sacred pact with a family whose power he couldn't comprehend. In the end, it wasn't just about a Tycoon father's revenge. It was about the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who rebuilt her life from the ashes, and a father who reminded the world that the most valuable asset will always be family. This tale of karma, justice, and resilience shows that sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't a loud, angry battle, but a quiet, clinical acquisition of everything a person holds dear. If this story of poetic justice and ultimate karma resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of strength and consequence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another incredible real-life drama. What would you have done in Alistair's position? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. Thank you for listening.